when things like that happen around you, you know, there's something even in when you're very young that makes you think that shouldn't be happening. That really should not be happening. For 30 years, we'd been shouting about safety and whispering health, you know, and we had to get them up on an equal footing. Remember what I said? I said it was a core value of the organisation. I didn't say it was a priority. Priorities change, core values don't. My boss at the time told me to rewrite the report. He said, if you put that out as it is, we're going to get prosecuted. And I said, and we should be. We were wrong, and we should take the consequences of that. Is there a white male group as well? And the answer I got back every time was, no, we don't need one.
Yeah.
Because they're all right. And I went, really? I'm not so sure. I always wanted to study engineering. There's a subtle difference between that and always wanted to be an engineer. Be yourself all of the time. There were times when I thought I had to try and fit in and be like the men.
Yeah.
And it took a long time for me to realise that the real value I brought to things was seeing things differently.
Every leader has a story to tell, and the Safe Leader podcast uncovers the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. Join me, your host, Mark McBride-Wright, as we hear from business leaders, academics, entrepreneurs, and agents of change as they share their journeys of innovation, resilience, and transformation. Together, we explore how they embrace the principles of safe leadership, sharing, acting, feeling, and empowering to create safer, more inclusive environments for everyone. Hello, welcome to the next episode of the Safe Leader podcast. I'm your host, Mark McBride-Wright, and I am honoured to be joined today by Dame Judith Hackitt, who is a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering and a Fellow of the Institution of Chemical Engineers. She's the former Chair of Ingenuity and also former Chair of the Office for Nuclear Regulation. So Dame Judith Hackitt is one of the UK's most respected engineering leaders, known for her formidable contributions to safety, regulation and industrial transformation. A chemical engineer by background, she has held senior roles across government, industry and professional bodies, including Chair of the Health and Safety Executive and President of the Institution of Chemical Engineers. She is perhaps best known for leading the independent review of building regulations and fire safety following the Grenfell Tower tragedy in London, producing the landmark Building a Safer Future report, which reshaped national policy on building safety. Her leadership emphasises personal responsibility, systems thinking, and culture change. Judith is a passionate advocate for competence, ethics, and engineering education. She most recently served as interim chair for the Office for Nuclear Regulation and chair of Ingenuity. And she remains a sought-after voice on regulation, skills, and safety leadership. She wrote the foreword for my book, The Safe Leader. Judith, how are you?
I'm good. And you?
I'm nervous, being honest. I hold you in such high esteem. So usually when I'm doing these podcasts, I'm not nervous. But you know, you've been such a role model for me over the years that, you know, the fact that you even want to talk to me for a few minutes is
I'm always happy to talk to you, Mark. Really am.
Is amazing. And there's that kindred affinity as well, that, you know, chemical engineer, health and safety, you used to run the HSE, you know, you supported me in the early days of moving into diversity when me and the team ran the first ever diversity survey at the ICME back in 2013, I think it was. You know, you kindly agreed. I've got a story about that event, actually. Do you know, it was the panel that you did at Imperial with Jeff Maitland, and it was the engineering diversity survey response that we were showcasing that we did at the London Southeast Member Group. And at the time you were chair at the Health and Safety Executive, but we had stickers that were made for everyone coming. And on your one, it said chairman. was like, no,
Right.
no. Where is the? So we had another one made for you, like behind the scenes. But anyway. So yes, I'm really excited to chat to you. So just in the podcast, we love understanding the person behind the person in front of us, the journey that's been taken to get to where you're at today. So if we can just wind all the way back to your early years, you started your career as a chemical engineer in
Yeah.
1975. Maybe even before that, what drew you to engineering? Think back to the young Judith Hackitt. What did you always want to be an engineer, or was there something else on the cards for you?
I always wanted to study engineering. That's there's a subtle difference between that and always wanting to be an engineer. So
Yeah.
the plan when I was at school was to be a teacher.
Okay.
And I wanted to be a science and maths teacher. And something about the different teachers I had at school told me that those who were best able to bring the subject alive were those who could put it into context.
Okay.
So the master plan was go to university, study an applied version, i.e. engineering, rather than pure science, go and work in industry for a couple of years, and then get into teaching. So I would be able to provide that context to all of those impressionable young people and inspire them to become scientists and future engineers. I got out there into industry, I loved it, and the plan to become a teacher is still on hold.
So it's still there, maybe.
Maybe. Well, interesting, isn't it? Because I think in lots of ways, you talked about me being a role model. I do a lot of mentoring for young people and young women in particular, and so I think I've
You're doing it.
satisfied the inner teacher in a different way.
Definitely that helping the next generation and the wisdom that you've acquired through your years of experience, being able to help shape people coming through is probably just as, if not more impactful than going back to the traditional teacher route. Looking back then, what have been some of the defining experiences that shaped your thinking on safety? And I'm really interested on safety as a culture, not just, compliance.
Okay. Well, I suppose it's worth saying, that I was the first person in my family ever to go to university. I came from a pretty industrial background. Both of my grandfathers were coal miners.
Okay.
Worked underground. And the village I grew up in was very much a mining village where it wasn't unusual to hear of people suffering serious injuries or even death and not coming home from work again.
Yeah.
So I also had a great aunt who worked in a factory making hats, and she was scalped at work. She got her hair caught in a mill and was scalped at work. So when things like that happen around you, there's something even in when you're very young that makes you think that shouldn't be happening. That really should not be happening. And her injury was long before I was born, but she suffered the rest of her life because of that. I never ever saw her without a hat on. And those images stay with you, I think, all and shape you in ways that you maybe not even conscious of.
Yeah.
But then when I was at university, of course, in my second year, I guess, 1974, the Flixborough disaster happened. So here I am studying chemical engineering, loving it, and then all of a sudden you think, wow,
Yeah.
30 people killed, in an accident, and people living all around the site had their houses damaged, suffered injuries and so on. And all of a sudden that wake-up call that says safety is really, really important in this industry that I am about to join for however long. So that's always stuck with me. That sense of this really matters.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I would say is that in lots of ways, because I joined Exxon, as the first company after I left university, committing yourself to safety was non-negotiable.
Hmm.
It was so endemic, and it simply was the case that you do this safely or you don't do it,
Hmm.
and we were all taught that. And it truly was a core value of the organisation.
Do you think that's been sustained over the years across industry? Because just thinking about the timing of it, we're talking in my book, The Safe Leader, about the evolution of health and safety going way back to, the 1800s. And then we look at the Bradley curve and the gradual reduction in lost time injury rates, and safety really being taken seriously when it became a compliance requirement. Whereas back in the day, you could just do what you wanted, or people would laugh about it. Well, I often hear people say now, or even I say now, that where we're at on diversity and inclusion now is where safety was pre the Health and Safety at Work Act, in the 1950s, the 1960s. And of course,
Yeah,
that act
yeah.
came in 1974 when you were a first year, second year chemical engineer. So do you think that culture that you then moved into in Exxon a few years after that was the roots of that starting to take shape and impact culture?
Remember what I said? I said it was a core value of the organisation. I didn't say it was a
Ah,
priority.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the number of times that I've heard people say, safety is our number one priority.
yeah,
That's not good enough.
yeah.
It's not a priority. It has to be properly embedded in everything you do and the way you think about things.
Mhm.
Um, Priorities change, core values don't.
Mm, mm. In my recent, so I was a practicing process safety engineer until 2017 before setting up eco engineers, and I've had a more of a squiggly career up until now. But since writing the book and coming back to safety, technical
Hmm.
safety, um, I've seen this movement towards this idea of restorative just culture, total worker health rather than LTIRs being a metric because they drive the wrong sort of behaviors in management teams. And
Yeah.
I find it fascinating because this is exactly where culture can live. The people that you have
Yes.
around you, like
Yes.
where the message that I'm trying to sort of advocate for could live. So can you just talk us through your experience with the evolution of safety over the duration of your career?
Yeah. I think it is a journey, and in fact, this year I've done a couple of presentations to different audiences celebrating 50 years since the Health and Safety at Work Act,
Yes, of course.
and talking about that whole journey of the last 50 years. Because of course it didn't happen overnight, and it kind of maps my career. So 1974, the Act was
Yeah.
introduced. When I went to work in industry the year after, that coupled with the aftermath of Flixborough meant that in a high hazard industry like I was in, it pretty much dominated everything we did and everything we thought about.
Hmm.
And new practices were developing, things like HAZOP and the whole safety committee set up with safety reps in the workplace and all of that. And it really was quite exciting actually to be part of setting all of that up and establishing the right culture, because I can remember that some of those early safety committee meetings with safety reps, with the best will in the world, we would sit down and you would be talking at odds with one another,
Right.
where the people who were management wanted to talk about this set of things, and the people from representing the workforce had a very different agenda and a very different list of not trivial because they were important things to them, but they were of a different type and on a different scale
Yeah.
from the sort of bigger issues that we wanted to raise. So finding your way through all of that, and I guess one of the things that I always remember that we did at Fawley in those early days was we did joint supervisor and safety rep training.
Nice. So equal
And
footing.
yeah, and 20 years later, when I suggested that in another company, after I'd moved on from Exxon, everybody went, "Oh, you can't do that." And I went, you can, and it works. And they suddenly realised that they have a shared agenda.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a unifying topic, not something to battle over, but getting to that point where you see it in that way takes a lot, and it takes some courage sometimes to do things like that. So,
Mm.
and there's lots of things in what I've just said that resonate with the things you say in your book about getting people to feel part of it rather than being done to.
Yeah, it's very endearing to me to hear that you believe in the framework or the postulation of like an idea for change, because it's still, the what I lay out in the book still feels very much like that. And you know it kind of came through manifestation of like different sides of my identity, being an engineer, but then wanting to be a diversity practitioner, but
Yeah.
then never getting a diversity role because I never had CIPD after my name or a level 5 HR qualification or what have you. But then I realized that my CEng became a bit of a superpower, so to speak. I could leverage
Right.
affinity bias to my advantage when I'm in front of usually an all male audience. He's one of us. He understands. He talks our language.
Yes. Yes.
And then I can start peeling the layers back and start, talking about diversity and through this lens. And then, yeah, and that came from trying to run an LGBT centered organization, Inter Engineering, which we had some success with and continue to do so. But it was when I then stepped into Equal Engineers and wanted to broaden and focus on more strands of diversity that I realized this pushback, or this, not an active pushback, but a kind of passive nodding of heads. We agree with you. We know we're not allowed to disagree with you because it's not the done thing to do, but I don't feel included in this movement. And when you've got 84% of the engineering workforce being men, that doesn't necessarily that doesn't set you up for a very successful strategy for inclusion and diversity. And so the aha moment when I heard about these, it was I was on a panel in 2018, and it was the Office of National Statistics that presented the breakdown of death by suicide by occupation.
Yeah.
And I remember
Yeah.
the bucketing. It was the construction, manufacturing, and process industries. It was those three classifications combined had the highest rate of loss of life due to suicide than any other sector. And, this was the light bulb moment for me where I was thinking, well, we would never tolerate such a high rate of loss of life due to any sort of physical incident. We would design it out, eradicate it, reduce it to a LARP, and then manage residual risk. Whereas this could be due to a lack of psychosocial safety, psychological safety. Why are people not being open about the root causes that might be driving this high incident rate of suicidal ideation, self-harm, which are the extreme end of top events, the top event, loss of life due to suicide. So inclusion and diversity allows this conversation about belonging, bringing your whole self to work. And that also equally applies to white, straight, male engineers that maybe feel a bit ostracized. So what I'm really keen to get into your mind, like when you were reading the book, what thoughts you had on this framing. Do you think there's an opportunity for safety to help continue to progress the conversation on inclusion?
Absolutely. So, lots of things I could say. Let me start by saying, that you asked me a while back about the journey in safety, and it was all about safety. And just about the time that I became the chair of HSE in 2007, that was when the regulator issued its guidelines on stress, right?
Okay.
And I remember then some very difficult conversations with people that said, this is not health and safety. Well, it is, but and it was clear to me back then that for, I guess by then, for 30 years we'd been shouting about safety and whispering health,
Yeah.
and we had to get them up on an equal footing. And even then, people found it easier to talk about harm to health where it meant physical harm, hearing loss or COPD or whatever. That side of the health thing they could get. But talking about the mental health thing was particularly difficult. And lots of people really didn't want to go there. And it's tough, it's tough for people to talk about it, especially in, as you said, those male-dominated industries where the whole masculinity thing is about being tough and being macho and admitting weakness. That's what mental health is seen as in lots of those. So there's so many taboos and stigmas to overcome. It's challenging, but having said that, I also remember conversations that I've had over the years where, in different organisations that I've either been part of as an executive or more in the last 10 to 15 years as a non-exec, I've often got into debates about. I've been the diversity champion in a number of them, as well as being involved in health and safety, and people have reeled off to me all the different groups they have, in the diversity and inclusion space, so there'll be a women's group and an ethnic minorities group and a sexual orientation group, all of the things that you would expect. And I remember on more than one occasion, and I'm going back a lot of years now, saying, is there a white male group as well? And the answer I got back every time was, no, we don't need one.
Yeah.
Because they're all right. And I went, really? I'm not so sure. And looking back now and reading your book, that's the bit that really gets me and really grabs me in terms of, yes, that's what we did wrong. We alienated that majority by the way we went about it.
Well, as Amy Edmondson puts it, failure, we learn from failure, we learn from the gaps in our knowledge, and then we take stock and try and bridge that and make amends. So, we at Equal Engineers have set up a men's network. It's like 6 months old. It's really young.
Yeah.
But I've basically absorbed inter-engineering into Equal Engineers. We've got cross-sector network groups for all the other identities, menopause, women, ethnic minority, etc. But we've set up a men's network, and our co-chairs are Jamie Chestnut, who used to be the Director of Engineering at the RNLI, and also Chris Hamlin, who's a fellow at the Royal Academy of Engineering. And I watched the webinar that they did 2 weeks ago. I rewatched it last night. Watched it for the first time. Sorry, I didn't watch it first time round. Time difference, New York makes it hard to attend lunchtime things when dropping the kids off at school. But the guys opened up. They opened up about some stuff that even I didn't know about them actually, despite recruiting them to the co-chair roles. And so I just think it's so powerful. It's probably the single biggest achievement we could do for engineering that would then have a domino effect on everything, absolutely everything. And to bring men together through kindred sharing of stories, and getting them to better empathize with then the needs of other groups, because I think we're so bad as men at processing our own baggage and own trauma that, as you say, we project this image, and then there's that energy gap between who we're showing up as and what's going on in our minds. And I always say we want people not just to be physically present at work. We don't want them to just be physically present but mentally absent. We want everyone to be fully there. And in a high hazard industry, when you've got people dealing with high pressure, high temperature pipelines and crane operations and nuclear reactors and everything, you don't want a lack of psychological safety to be a reason why mistakes are made, why accidents then happen. And so it's a work in progress, trying to get this industrial scale conversation going. But I think if we can achieve it, it'll have such a positive effect for women in engineering, because disproportionately men still hold positions of power through their privilege in leadership roles. And if we can crack that awareness for them to have this aha moment, and then it flows through with how they do their organizational design and their culture intervention programs. I think there's
I think that's one of the reasons why I always, when I talk about safety, I talk about how important the Health and Safety at Work Act was in the, not just the standards it set, but the way it went about that. Because what it said was, this is a journey and you never get there.
Yeah.
And so when people talk to me about how do we know whether we're compliant or not, wrong question. There is no such thing as compliance. There is, are you doing enough? Could you do more? What's your plan for improvement? Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves. Because the notion of compliance means I can tick the boxes and I can walk away saying job done. And you're absolutely right. This is a journey. There is more still to do, and the world is changing all the time. So we have to think of new ways of responding to new risks, new challenges all the time. And we have to break that mindset of, once I'm over the line of compliance, job done, I can move on and do something else. No, that's not possible in this space.
And we've got a really interesting kind of 5 to maybe 10-year window right now where we've got such a diversity of generations still in active employment in the workforce. And those older generations that are so easy to stereotype as well, that they're incapable of change, is absolutely wrong, and always something that I call out as well, or call in when I'm on a panel or I hear someone say it. Because I said, you're doing the reverse of what you don't like to another tranche of the workforce, and you need to think about the context within which people grew up, were professionally trained in. Some of this stuff is soft and fluffy and not something that they were ever used to as one of the leadership paradigms. And they probably got to where they're at based on their technical competence and never actually had the investment in themselves to develop their leadership acumen, their people leadership roles. So I think we've got a ton of that going on in the profession right now as well. So have you got any ideas on how can that be overcome? Like what do we need to do?
I think you've got something in the things you talk about in the book, and I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you. I was really struck by some of the examples you shared in there of people who have lived with impairment to their own capabilities, and they've managed to hide it for a very long time. And it's only by bringing them into the same room as people who are dealing with, for example, they feel different because they are from a different ethnic background, and helping both sides to see that those two things are unifying rather than alienating. And that they both have the same sorts of feelings about things, feelings of lack of confidence and being isolated, and it helps them to then look out for one another.
Yeah.
And the opportunities to do that are enormous.
Well, that's where I talk in the book about. I mean, it took a lot of work, mental processing, that extension of the Bradley curve, where I propose that inclusive interdependence, which is a really subtle and hard to describe sometimes reframe, but I think it fits squarely within when we talk about allyship in EDI.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when we're often like to be allies when it's easy, but when it's hard, we step back because there's a risk to us by being aligned with that group that's now in distress, or the focus of the villagers with pitchforks, as I say. But then if we pull back, then when I'm at risk or I'm exposed, who's going to be there for me? So it's that idea of safety, like you looking out for others, is also means by reciprocity they're looking out for you. I can't remember the story fully, but I think it was Joe Amici, the former NBA basketball player. He's now a very successful psychologist, and he shares an example about how he was in a hotel once and someone was smoking and flicking the cigarettes, and there was like lots of cigarettes piling up outside the balcony on the ground, and people would walk past and say, "Oh, that's really bad. That shouldn't happen." People who do that, but no one took action to solve the problem, to call it out or to clean it up. And I'm not really explaining this very well, but basically it was this analogy of being the first follower, so the leader who steps out there to call something out, but then who comes with them to give it that credibility. And that's when you then see the groundswell, because others are thinking it, but then someone's taking action on what they're thinking. And that's what the whole psychological safety culture is about. You might be thinking about it, but the group think means you're going to be too at risk of saying something, so therefore you don't say something. And that's what we try and proclaim as our safety cultures are, but are they actually that? Not so much.
Yeah, but you mentioned earlier that you have to couple this with the kind of just culture thing, because in my experience, the thing that gets in the way of people calling out things in safety more often than not is that blame culture that kicks in so many organisations. So you call something out, you say this was wrong, and whether that's about safety or about behaviours with respect to other people who may have felt threatened and so on. This is where your safety analogy is really, really powerful, in terms of where we are on helping people to feel included. Is where we used to be on safety, where you call something out and immediately there would be a witch hunt for who got it wrong. Who are we going to discipline for this? Let's have let's have an investigation and find out who got it wrong here, and we'll hang them out to dry. We've gotten over that, and by talking about in most places we've got over that. Not totally, but we now talk about just culture, and we talk about learning from mistakes, like you did earlier, and how can we acknowledge that we need to learn from this and move on and do things differently. But think about where we are currently, and I see this a lot right now in terms of people make a complaint about the way they've been treated or the way they've been made to feel in the workplace. The processes that kick in right now are pretty traumatic. And they're traumatic not only for the person who makes the complaint, but the person who's being accused, right? Because they're immediately ostracized, they're immediately taken out of the workplace. We're being, I think, pretty clumsy about the way we deal with some of those behavioural issues, which are really about changing the culture. And that acts as a real barrier to being able to have the sorts of conversations that you talk about in the book. That are ultimately going to get us to the place that we need to get to.
We've evolved since I wrote the book. We've evolved. We've designed a course called the Safe Leader Training Course. It's 4 modules, 1 module per letter: share, act, feel, empower. There's a new graphic we've got now as well to go along with the book, which is the letters in a circle. So it's a bit like a plan, do, check, act type thing. The idea that you're constantly doing it. And the idea is that what we've brought into it is the act of storytelling, because engineers aren't always the best at telling their stories. So we've brought in some public speaking training. But what we encourage the groups to do and coach them through is understand what's your story. What have you got to share with the world? And that by you being open about that and sharing that story, it'll mean that someone else might resonate with it, and then they'll then be able to be open about that as well. And we don't have that in men being vulnerable, sharing about things beneath their waterline. My friend gifted me this little prop, which is a lighthouse. And I love it because, if you think about a ship at sea in the dark, can't see its way forward, that's why lighthouses were designed, to help provide some guidance. If you then had lots and lots of lighthouses, you would be able to see the pathway a lot more clearly. So if one's own story is a metaphor of a lighthouse, it means when we increase the number of stories that are available in the public domain or in the workplace, there's then more moments of connection and opportunity for empathy, to relate, for interpersonal relationships and connection. And I've just seen this happen with so many. I've given talks now at enough big conferences with engineers and that in the audience, to when we talk about the iceberg and people think that diversity is about women in engineering or LGBT or this and that. When you start talking about the bit of the iceberg on diversity of life experience, and saying, look, this means you being able to be in a culture that's about you being able to talk about the nasty divorce that you're going through right now, or talk about, do you know what one of the biggest things is that still doesn't get spoken about, that is affecting loads of people? Fertility, trying to have a family, struggling to conceive, IVF issues and miscarriages and all that stuff, that a lot of people, women and men, are just bottling up, not talking about. And so the number of times I talk and share and frame things in this way, and then have people come up to me afterwards and say, look, this really connected with me on this front. You're just like, oh, how do we now transition then to more people sharing that? And the boundary doesn't have to be that you have to go public and you now have to start talking about all your innermost thoughts to everyone. It's not about that. But the starting point in the Safe Leader program is at least doing that internal self-exploration, and then recognize that if you were to talk about that, someone else might then be able to relate with it. And then what we're doing is we're playing with the lived experience and learned experience. So we're increasing the probability of more opportunities for learned experience to be acquired from one another. So yeah, I don't know. I'm on a mission to try and scale this up basically and get it embedded in engineering practice. And we're talking to some universities just now. I've got plans to engage with all the engineering institutions in the UK. I'm really interested with iChemE actually. Maybe what can we do through them? But it's exciting.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the other book that I think it struck a chord with me, because I read a lot of books, and one of the other books that it struck a chord with me, some of the things you mentioned in your book, was The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. Have you read that?
Okay, no, not yet.
And it's great because he talks in there about how some of the best leaders, particularly in the sporting world, become the best leaders by sharing their own vulnerabilities with the team. And, when they admit that they feel nervous or they feel scared, it then encourages other people to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives that permission, doesn't it? Okay, well, talking about then safe leadership, what I like to do is go through the framework and ask my guests some questions on that. So let's start with share. You've always been clear about your views and expectations. So how do you share your insights and experiences to influence others?
In a number of ways, I suppose. I certainly do it through mentorship, as I said, and making myself available to mentor younger people coming into engineering in particular. And also, one of the areas that I'm doing quite a lot of mentorship now through the Royal Academy of Engineering is on systems thinking.
Okay.
Because I think in this last decade or so, I think I've realised how much I've always seen everything in front of me as being a system that needs to be addressed as such.
Okay.
And I kind of assumed that everybody did that, and it's become increasingly apparent to me that that's not the case. So helping other people to see the benefit of looking through that systems lens has become a really important part of me telling what I see and how I see the world. And in a way, that's what the Building a Safer Future report was all about, because I tackled it in the way that seemed absolutely, well, this is the only way I can do this, is to map out the system and think about whether the system is working or not. But it was so alien to other people, and they went, "Whoa, this is a very different way of coming at it. That's not how people normally do reviews." Well, that's my way.
Wow. Maybe we need an engineering approach for all reviews. For ACT then, what's one moment where you made a decisive intervention that shifted the direction of a team, a program, a policy?
There's probably a lot I could mention, but I guess the one I mentioned. So you talked about my kind of personal code of ethics, and my really strong belief that we have to not just do what we're told. In fact, not do what you're told if you know it's wrong.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article for iChemE, for the chemical engineer, about ethics 4 years ago, for which I got the Hansen Medal. But it talked about ethics, and the case I cited in there was a time when I was the operations director at a chemicals facility, and someone was badly injured. I did the investigation, and it became apparent to me very quickly that the unsafe practice had been going on for quite a long time.
Right.
And quite a few people knew about it, including the commissioning engineer, who had not told me or anyone in his line of chain of command that this was happening.
Right.
And so when I wrote the report, I put all of that in there and said, this is on us. We failed to provide a safe system of work, and this is leadership failure. My boss at the time told me to rewrite the report. He said, if you put that out as it is, we're going to get prosecuted. And I said, and we should be. We were wrong, and we should take the consequences of that. And he was very unhappy. I mean, when he said to me, think very carefully about whether you're going to do this or not, he meant it. But for me, there was no choice. You have to do that. You have to be true to yourself. You have to live with yourself. No cover-ups.
No. Yeah, completely. There was a case that made the media last year about a rail engineer that called out unsafe practices at Euston Station, and then it transpired that someone in Parliament or the House of Lords, I can't remember who, wasn't happy about that. And then there was action taken against the individual by the construction company that had employed them. And they were then subsequently interviewed by the new civil engineer. And there's a quote that they gave in there that really made me like reaffirmed, I guess, my identity as an engineer, which is, it's because of the code of practice that we sign and we're subscribed to by becoming chartered. It's a bit like a doctor or
Absolutely.
legal profession taking the oath. And
Yes.
so and people who employ engineers sometimes misconstrue that with employing consultants, and they forget about this ethical requirement that we have that's built into our code
Absolutely.
of conduct with having the license to practice,
Yeah.
which is exactly what you did then, isn't it? You were upholding your license to practice, and not doing a cover up or not telling the truth. And I think that's important it's a great leadership lesson for all engineers. In the field I mentioned then, how do you stay connected to the emotional aspects of leadership, especially when working in high stake environments?
I guess it's always been important to me to have people I can turn to for support, because we all feel vulnerable. There will always be days for every one of us. Even at my stage in my career now, there are times when you think, "Is it me? Am I the only one? Does everybody else see this differently?" And especially when you get knocked back, when you've taken a courageous stance and you get knocked back, you've got to have that support network to whom you can go and say,
Yeah.
and those people who will say, "No, keep going. You're on the right track.
It's
You're
the trust.
right.
It's the trust.
Keep going."
Trust in people that will not just tell you what you want to hear, but
Yes,
actually say,
your list of 10 people who you can
yeah,
trust. Absolutely. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So empowerment is something many associate with you, myself included. How do you empower emerging engineers, leaders, professionals to take ownership?
I think there's a few things. The first is to get them to. So it goes back to my safety is a core value, not a priority, right? And if you're not doing it for the right reasons, and it's not coming from the heart, then stop and sort yourself out, right? Because this is not about I'm doing it because I have to, because of my job, or because I'm going to go to prison. Do it because you care about the people. So get your motivation right is really, really an important message for me to people. I think that's probably at the heart of it, and everything else then follows, really.
And everything else you've said as well about, empowerment and taking it to heart and
Yeah.
remembering your duty of care and your how you treat people and the culture you create around you as
Yeah,
well.
but even the duty of care thing, it's a moral duty of care, not a legal one.
Yeah. True. That's a term that has meaning to it, legal meaning. Yeah, I meant it morally as well.
Yeah, yeah. I never want to be in a position where I have to berate myself for not having done the right thing, and knowing that I could have done something different.
Good stance. What? Okay, future goals then, and just thinking about legacy. You've helped shape engineering's past and present. What's next for you? What legacy do you hope to leave on for the future of the profession?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I keep trying to retire, and every time I do, something else comes up, and I continue to stay active because I enjoy what I do, and I do the things I care about. And one of the things I care about particularly right now is the work I do with the Royal Academy of Engineering, and there's really two strands to that. One of which is the Engineering X program, which is all about safer, complex systems. So going back to this journey, we never get to the end of this because you're never done on safety. The challenges, I think, now in the safety sphere are around, as our world gets more and more complex and interdependent,
Yep.
do we have the tools and the capabilities to manage safety in that increasingly complex world? And when you look at some of the things that happen, in the cyberspace, or just the interconnectedness
Yeah.
of systems around the world that we don't understand until it happens, it tells me we've got a long way to go on that. So that's one of my passions. And I guess the other one, in a slightly different context, is that we're doing a lot of work in the academy around helping policymakers, supporting policymakers to employ systems thinking in their approach to wicked policy problems.
Right.
And that's fascinating. That's fascinating because that then takes you into just about every sphere you could imagine, from, how can we unblock the bed blocking system in the health service, through how do you persuade people to adopt heat pumps? What are the blockers to people buying heat pumps? Because it's not just price, it's about a whole host of things that sit behind why people are reluctant to make that leap. And when you start applying systems thinking to some of those really quite challenging problems, it gives some really different insights to people on. It's not just a case of give them a loan or give them a grant or whatever. There's some hearts and minds winning to be done here.
I question, Judith, whether you will ever retire. Or you could, because I bring that to myself, and I just can't imagine clocking off and that's it. I don't know. I see what some people in my family who've retired and what they do, and I just don't think that's me. I think I'm going to be. I see people like yourself, Lord Brown, and others who are at the top end of their career, and once you get there, it just must be so difficult to. Or do you feel like it's something that's expected of you when you get to the latter stage of your career, like to retire? Do people ask, is that like a microaggression you're subject to often? When you going to retire? When you going to retire? Like, can it not just be enough that you don't feel that pressure, that maybe you don't want to retire?
It's an interesting question. Yes, I do feel that from people who have retired and who say, "Why haven't you retired?" And I say, "Because I don't want to."
Yeah.
Whilst ever there's things out there to do that interest me, I'm not ready to check out. And we have a great balance of time spent travelling, going on holiday. But when I'm here in the UK, I'm busy and I love it.
Good. Well, there should be no guilt in that in any way, shape, or form for you. And I'm happy because it means we get more time. Right, quick fire questions. What's the one piece of leadership advice you've ever received? What's the best piece of leadership advice you've ever received?
I think it's about being authentic. Be yourself. Don't try to be like other people.
Okay. What's your proud... Oh, right.
And for me, that involved going on a course on women's leadership to learn what it meant to be a woman leader.
Okay. What's your proudest professional moment?
I think it would be both receiving my damehood, but also last year getting the President's Medal from the Royal Academy of Engineering.
What's one skill you think all engineers should be taught from day one?
To stop talking and listen.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
What's your go-to thinking tool or model?
Systems thinking.
Who is one engineering leader, past or present, you admire?
Jim McDonald. Sir Jim McDonald. I have a lot of admiration for Jim for what he has done and the achievements he's made in his life.
What's one thing you do to reset after a long day or an intense meeting?
Come home and have a glass of wine.
What's a piece of policy work you're most proud of?
Oh, I think undoubtedly it would be the work I've done on building safety, because I've just got sucked into it. Willingly, I hasten to add, so what was a 12-month do this review I'm now into my 8th year of being involved in it, and there is so much to do, and it's become a real personal mission for me to make this change.
You might want to listen to the podcast I did with Benjamin Hollis, I think his name was. He talks about your review in that. It was very interesting, very positive. What book or resource would you recommend to today's engineering leaders?
In addition to yours, I think it would be the Culture Code.
Okay. And finally, what advice would you give to your younger self just starting out?
I think it is this: be yourself all of the time. I know that in my own personal journey in this male-dominated world that I've made my way in, there were times when I thought I had to try and fit in and be like the men.
Yeah.
And it took a long time for me to realise that the real value I brought to things was seeing things differently.
You mentioned that women's leadership course that you went on, and I wanted to just drill into that a little bit more. Was it that experience that made you shift your position or change your perception?
Yes, absolutely.
And is that something? I know we said we'd finish, but can you go into that a little bit more? I'm really conscious we never touched on that side of your identity, being a woman engineer, female engineer. So, what advice would you give to listeners, and what experience did you go through in that?
I think it's probably one of the most profound changes for me. Lots of courses teach you lots of things, but that one was a real in-depth experience, and I came away from that feeling very different about myself, feeling very much more confident to be myself and stop trying to be like other people.
Fabulous.
And that just it makes you behave differently because you operate out of you're being authentic.
Yeah.
And so it makes such a difference. But you have to get. I think what I've also learned is that it was a week-long course followed by a number of follow-up sessions that got me to that place. And I think, all of us act a part to some extent or another. Mm-hmm. And to be able to get in touch with that, truly being yourself at work, which you talk about, and being the same person wherever you are, and feeling comfortable in your own skin, literally, is so important to being a good leader.
Yeah.
To let go of the acting.
Brilliant. I think that's great advice to end on. Thank you so much, Judith. Really enjoyed chatting to you. If people want to get in touch, find out more about your activities, what you're involved with these days, how should they do that? They
can always send me a message on LinkedIn. Okay. I love to hear from people through LinkedIn.
Fabulous. Yeah. We'll put a link to your profile in the transcript in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
You have been listening to the Safe Leader podcast, uncovering the diversity story behind leading figures championing change to make our world a better place. If you have enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to the Safe Leader podcast on your podcast platform of choice and get notified when a new episode goes live. Did you know that we also offer a full transcript on each of our podcast episodes? Check out my website, McBride-Wright.com. Here, you can also explore the training, coaching, and keynote speaking services I offer. And whilst you're there, why not join the Safe Leader community by subscribing to the Safe Leader Insights mailing list? Thank you for listening, and please come back and join us on a future episode.